So today I'm joined by Charles Cartwright. He's the VP of Scientific Affairs from SpeeDx, and he's going to join us and present a short talk or a session telling us a little bit more about the company and what they do. After that, we're going to dive right in and we're going to get a whole bunch of Q&A. So as you hear him talk and as your mind starts ticking away and you start getting that burning question that you want to ask, please pop it into the Q&A function and we'll do our best to get to them. But I've got a long list of questions from people as you applied to come along and registered for this talk. You submitted some great questions, which I always want to get through and get into a little bit more about what makes SpeeDx so special and why everybody should want to know about what they're doing and be part of that journey. But for now, I am delighted to hand over to Charles to give us a bit of a lightning talk on SpeeDx. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Sally Ann, for the introduction and welcome everybody to the presentation here on SpeeDx and what we do and some of the exciting things that we're working in. So one of the challenges here, and I'm sure it's true of most of the companies that are in cicada, is how do we translate what's a very arcane world that we work in, that we make a lot of assumptions that people understand exactly what we're talking about, into something that's relatable to other people that maybe are not as au fait with the world that we work in. So what does SpeeDx do? Well, in a very long and convoluted sentence, we are a molecular diagnostic test developer and manufacturer. And so what does that really mean? This to explain that would have been a lot more difficult, I think, a year ago than it is now, because I suspect a lot of people that are on this phone call or on this Zoom meeting have actually personally experienced having a molecular diagnostic test performed in the last few months, where you went and somebody shoved a swab up your nose and sent it to a lab and they tested it to see if you were positive for coronavirus, because that is the world that we work in. The primary test used for determining whether people are infected with COVID is a molecular diagnostic test using the core base technology that SpeeDx works with. And that base technology is a method called the polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. And what that does is it takes little tiny pieces of your genetic material or the genetic material of a virus or a bacterium and multiplies them billions and billions of times. And what that does for those of us who are trying to diagnose disease is essentially, instead of us trying to find one needle in a giant haystack, it fills the haystack with billions and billions of needles, which makes it obviously a lot easier to find. And what SpeeDx has done, what our core key, sort of our deep tech is to basically take the fundamental concept of PCR and how it works and apply novel ways of using it. Novel technology to make it more usable, to make it more adaptable, to make it more flexible, and therefore to make it more clinically applicable in the marketplace. And that really is, and we can go into this, I'm sure, in a little bit more detail later, but that really is the core essence of what we do. And we've gone from a company that 11 years ago had, I think, 4 people started the company essentially, to now today we have just about 90 people working for SpeeDx. We have locations in 3 continents. So we have our main office here in Sydney, where most of the people work. Then we have an operation in the United States, and actually I'm based in the US right now. So we have an operation in the United States, and we are actively pursuing opportunities in the US market. And then we also have a European office. So we've grown dramatically, obviously, and been very successful in going from a tiny little startup company to still what in our world is a small company, but one with a growing presence. And I think it's important to understand, I think, a little bit about the challenges that you face as a startup company in the world that we work in. So the medical device industry as a whole is a highly regulated business, unlike some of the other things that maybe people work in, where you produce a product and your main focus is how to get people to adopt the product. We've got an interim step between that, which is we've got to produce the product, we've got to get the regulators in various parts of the world to review the product and make sure that it's acceptable, it's safe and effective, and then we've got to try and sell it. And some of our competitors are, of course, very large, very familiar multinational companies with thousands of employees. So you know, our success is built on our way of essentially being the nimble guy that works around or between or through the cracks that the large multinational companies don't address. And one of the things that I think is very appealing about what we do here is when we actually succeed in producing something that then later on we get approached by one of the large multinationals about how they can work with us as SpeeDx to bring our innovation and our product to market in their portfolio. So I really don't want to talk too much about, you know, the nitty-gritty of what we do. Essentially, we are a medical device company. We make molecular diagnostic tests. So these are chemistry-driven reagents. They get run in hospital laboratories or reference laboratories around Australia and elsewhere in the world. And, you know, again, our focus going forward is to increase our footprint, so to sell more product, to increase the portfolio of products, and to still innovate. So we're very proud of the fact that we still have an innovations group that is producing new versions or more sophisticated or different versions of our technology that are still patentable. In fact, I think we got two patents on completely new tech this year. So we have the technology focus, but also now an increasing commercial focus to drive the business forward. And with that, I'll leave it open to questions, because I think we can dig into what we do or specific things that are much better in a sort of a Q&A format. So Sally Ann, I'll turn it back to you.
I love it. Thank you, Charles. I think it's SpeeDx for me is one of these really, really exciting stories to talk about, and great companies, because I think it's incredibly impactful, the work that you're doing on human health and well-being, but it's not obvious. So most of us don't necessarily see, as you mentioned, we don't see those test kits. We don't see what's going on in the labs. You know, it's as a consumer, I'm not aware of that. I'm just aware of something getting stuck down the back of my throat or up my nose, and then somebody somewhere is responsible for telling me what's wrong with me. Can we pass this a little bit for my family? So my parents owned a fruit and veggie shop. They're definitely not health professionals or scientists. If I was to say to them, you know, SpeeDx does this amazing stuff, the kits that they use in the labs, the tests that they do, diagnose, what kinds of things are you diagnosing? What are the tests that you have available? And can you tell us also about I was talking to Alyssa the other week about antibiotic resistance, and why does that matter too? Because I think these are two really big things about, oh my gosh, this is why SpeeDx is so cool.
Right. So I think that sort of fits in, leads in a little bit into kind of the history of the company as well.
Perfect.
So you know, the original sort of foundational basis of the company was to take proprietary technology, again, with this, what we call molecular amplification, which is basically, again, we take a little bit of genetic material, because obviously every living thing has genetic material. So you take a piece of genetic material and make lots and lots and lots and lots of copies of it, which makes it much more amenable to finding. So things that are relatively uncommon or rare in a specimen that we collect from a patient, we can then make it much easier to find. So when the company started, was to take that tech and go to other companies that were developing applications of technology for the clinical space. So the biggest one that we worked with was actually a panel for diagnosing genetic variants in cancers.
Wow.
So where you would identify these genetic variants in patients, and if they have the variant, then they either had a malignancy or they were at high risk of developing a malignancy, and so on. And that was a very successful business model to start the company, because that meant that the partners were responsible for all the regulatory work and all the manufacturing work. We were basically doing, you know, contract development work for them, and then we handed it off and they commercialized it and sold it. And that still is a source of revenue for SpeeDx today. We still have, there's a very successful product that's on the market by a company that we developed. Now, when they talk about it, you'll never hear them mention that the technology that underpins it was developed by a little Australian company. They talk a lot about how wonderful it is and how well it works. And so that was really the initial phase. And then a decision was made, I think around 2014, 2015, that, you know, we wanted to be really a player in this arena beyond simply sitting there and making contract products for somebody else. And at the same time, fortuitously, as is, you know, you'd like to believe that every successful startup company does it all from, you know, pure genius and whatever, but there's a lot of serendipity involved in this, right? So we had a lot of connections with local investigators, researchers that we'd explored opportunities with. And one that they came to us essentially and said, can you develop an assay to detect this emerging sexually transmitted pathogen? It's an organism called Mycoplasma genitalium. And oh, by the way, at the same time, what we're seeing is this bacteria is, because of essentially use of antimicrobials without knowing anything about what you're treating. So what we call empiric treatment. So somebody comes in with a certain set of symptoms and you give them 1 of 2 or 3 antibiotics and you hope it works. And if it doesn't work, they come back and you give them another one. And if that doesn't work, you give them another one, and on and on and on. And it's a very inexact way of working. And this organism had rapidly become resistant to the first line drug that they wanted to use. Could we develop an assay where they could diagnose the infection and determine which antibiotic to treat them? And that became the flagship product that really put the company on the map. So we became an infectious disease diagnostic developer because we worked with these folks. And I think one of the things that's really key there, and it's probably true in every startup in every industry, is making these key connections with people who are the key drivers in your sector of the industry, what we call key opinion leaders. So essentially what you've got then is you've got ready access to somebody that maybe a big company has to pay them to talk for them or present for them or do studies for them. We go to them with a hook, right? Which is, okay, you want something, we'll produce that for you. We don't have to go through 5 layers of management and meetings that take 6 months and maybe we'll get back to you. We'll commit to doing that. And in doing so, we get them engaged with us on an ongoing basis. And the value that we've obtained from having, you know, leaders in the field work with you and help you develop product and put it on the market. So that really set us on a path for doing infectious diseases. And that's essentially what right now we do. So we have a suite of tests that diagnose sexually transmitted infections. And we now started working in other areas. We did not want to be pigeonholed as, oh, SpeeDx, they're the STI company, right? So one of the areas that we were moving in, and again, some of this is fortuitous, is into respiratory tract infections. And that leads us now into developing assays for SARS-CoV-2 and selling to people in a market now that's completely blown up and changed beyond all recognition. So I think for the foreseeable future, most of our frontline technology is going to be focused on infectious disease, whether diagnosis of infection or helping clinicians better manage their patients, whether it's through detection of resistance to antibiotics, or now we're moving into another exciting area, which is looking at how the host, how the infected person reacts to an infection and using that to predict what will happen to them and therefore helping clinicians to better manage patients. And that at the crux or the heart of the company is what it's all about. What it's always been about for me throughout my whole career is at the end of what we do is a physician treating a patient. So at the ultimate end is somebody like your family, like everybody's relatives or friends or whatever, receiving medical care. And yes, I agree with what you said, Sally Ann, that, you know, and it's the same thing we see when on TV medical shows, right? Yeah. It's always the doctor in the white coat saving the patient's lives, and it's not necessarily either the people behind the scenes. So in the clinical laboratory who are doing the tests, or the companies like us who have to or our mission is to provide them with better and more reliable diagnostic tests to improve care. But one of the key stats I always put out is that the laboratory is a very, very small part of the overall economics of a hospital. It's maybe 2-3% of the total cost of the hospital. But tests that come out of that laboratory inform 80 to 85% of all medical decisions that are made. So it's a huge, huge impact on patient care. And we, again, I think everybody that works here always gets sort of inculcated it with the idea that that's really what we're doing. We're not just making widgets, we're making widgets that actually make a real difference in people's lives. And so one of the key things that we put in our metrics now is how many patient lives have we impacted this year, and therefore as a growth metric, how many patient lives do we want to have impacted by the end of next year, to get people more sort of visually or more engaged in that's actually what we do as a company.
I love that. I love the explanation and how you've painted that, but I love that final stat that you've made a goal for the company and a goal for mission for people, because it does bring you back to people. And it isn't just about the science and the discovery and what you can do in the lab and how you might be able to make something about it. It is actually human lives that you're trying to have a positive impact on health and well-being. And you know, that is just so inspiring. It kind of leads me, I guess, into my next question about, you know, why did you join SpeeDx and what's it like? You know, you talked about a little bit about it's been a growth company from 4 people. And I know it was founded off the back of a recession, which, you know, something we're all facing at the world right now. But there's been this incredible company. Why did you join? And what is it about working in, you know, in a growth stage startup, if you like, that gets you out of bed? You've touched on a little bit, but your personal reasons.
Right. So, so my career basically for the last years has been in clinical laboratory medicine. So I've worked on really all sides of the various fences that are in this area. So I worked in industrial, commercial assay development at the very start of my career. And then I went into academic medicine. So I taught students and I ran hospital laboratories. So I'm a clinical microbiologist by formal training. And then I worked for a very large commercial organization that provided laboratory tests to clinicians. And that path had really gone, you know, had gone as long as I wanted to work in that environment. I really didn't find that very rewarding anymore. It was very difficult to navigate through. There were just too many layers, too many people. It was not a really great fit at the end. But one of the things that had happened actually during that time was that one of my responsibilities, funnily enough, was as the leader of the team in infectious disease that assessed new technologies and new opportunities for the company. Like, did we want to bring this in as a potential offering for our clinicians? And so that's how I met the people from SpeeDx. They presented to us, and I thought this is really intriguing and is an excellent potential for us to partner with them, for us to take their tech into our labs to offer to our customers. So when I left that company, you know, I was looking around for the next thing to do. And at the same time, it so happened that SpeeDx was looking to both expand its presence in the United States and also, I think, gain a better sort of broader understanding of clinical medicine and clinical laboratory medicine to help, you know, what was really a very tech-focused company, right? A lot of really smart people in here, tech-driven, not necessarily with that clinical background or expertise. And so, and the CEO of the company, as you know, Sally, is a pretty persuasive guy. And so he went to work. It didn't actually take him that long to convince me to join. And I started off doing some consulting for the company for a few months, and then it transitioned into having a permanent role. And I think for me, at the stage of my career, I think there are two things that are really get me excited about working for the company. I think one is the fundamental mission, because that's the mission that I believe in. That's why I've been in this business for as many years as I have. It's because I don't think there's anything more rewarding than working in something that benefits the well-being of other people. There's nothing more immediately rewarding than that. We are actually on a daily basis providing data to clinicians to make people feel better, and that to me is about the ultimate. I don't see there's anything more than that. And then the second one is to work in it's a small company, but a small, very dynamic company with lots of really energetic, can I say, younger people, some of them much younger people. And so I see, you know, myself as being able to provide mentorship and a sort of an experience level to them that hopefully will, you know, we can develop them into the next leaders of the clinical diagnostics world. And so those two things are really the primary for me, and it's been really enjoyable. So, I mean, obviously the last year has been very tough for all of us. This is the first time I've been able to come to Australia since February of last year. Oh, sorry, February of this year. And, you know, you have to sit in a hotel room for 2 weeks before they let you out. So that's been very challenging. But working with this great group of people has been terrific. And for a, you know, transplanted Pommy who's lived in the US for almost 35 years now, to be, you know, working for an Australian company is quite an interesting and novel experience, but it's, you know, it's a very rewarding one. So that's really sort of in a nutshell my personal story. And yeah, it's really all about feeling that you can personally make a difference to the company, and then by making a difference to the company, make a difference to actually the well-being of people. And I think that's what energizes most of our staff and people that come in and do what they do, which in many instances is way, way, way above what you could expect somebody to do just because you pay them to come to work.
I love it. Your passion shines through on that. And there's a couple of things that I think really resonate. And I'm seeing some questions coming in, and they sort of dovetail with the questions that we received earlier, which I'd love to kind of pivot to, because you kind of brought this up about the opportunity to kind of mentor and coach and support, I think, as you said, younger people. So let's talk about SpeeDx's growth and hiring and where you're at now and hiring plans. I know you've grown like 26 more people or something since the start of the year. It's probably higher than that, because every day I talk to somebody in the hallways, I feel like we've gone, oh no, there's an extra two. And I'm like, where are they? I make sure you're COVID compliant.
Well, we actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, I just have a little minor anecdote that actually it's really not funny, but we did actually have people in the company's offices, and people were like, who are they? Do they actually, does that person work for the company? We actually had people who didn't work for the company, I think, who, so yeah, it's, and in the 9 months or whatever it is since I've been here, we've added 30 odd or 25 to 30 people. And so, you know, literally I walked in there and said, you know, please, you probably can figure out who I am. I'm reasonably distinctive. But I don't know who you are, so please come up and just say hello. And maybe if you repeat your name 3 or 4 times, it might penetrate and I'll remember it. But yeah, it's been a major expansion of staff over the past, you know, year basically.
So, I mean, that's amazing. So congratulations first, because hiring, I think, in the midst of this and growth is huge. Who are you looking to hire? Are they junior roles? Are they more senior roles? What's the skill set? We've got lots of people really curious. We've got people that want to come in as interns, as an undergraduate student. I can see Violet's asking for that opportunity, which she can connect with on our website as well. But, you know, what is it that you're looking to hire? Where is the growth plans? Because I know it's some will be in Australia, some might be overseas. What skill sets are really the company most in need of right now?
So mostly what we've done is greatly expand our bandwidth here in Australia. So really this is the hub of the company. It's a Sydney-based company. It's going to continue to be a Sydney-based company. And I think really in all areas we've expanded. So really we have fundamentally two sort of arms of the company, essentially. So we still have the innovation, the tech arm, the development arm of new stuff. So that's an area where, we've added people with obviously a very generally sophisticated science-based background. And we do have a track record in that area of also developing people. So we still have a situation where we develop people through PhD programs. I think we've done 3 or 4 people by now that we've taken through. And really it sounds very altruistic, but it really isn't, because what we do then is when they're really good, we poach them and hire them, and then they come in as senior scientists, and then they continue to contribute. Plus the stuff that they're all inventing when they're doing their PhD becomes intellectual property for SpeeDx, so it's a win-win. So we have that side, and then the other side really now is more on the sort of commercial development side. So there are technical jobs in that area. So jobs in operations, which is basically manufacturing or quality control, and then jobs in commercial research and development. So that's really where we've taken something that we now are committed to developing a commercial regulated product and putting that through the process to get it finalized, validated into trials and out to the customer. And that really covers a pretty broad array of people. It's mostly, I'm just getting some sideline advice. So we also, and then there are the sort of adjunctive areas to support that. So, systems, marketing, all the sort of things that we need to support the products that are on the market. So, I think we've looked at, we've also added, she just gave me another one. So we've also added field support. So that's a growing area. We actually added a service engineer, because this year, again, a major development for the company was we actually put instrumentation in the field. So before, we've been relying entirely on third parties for their instrumentation solutions. And this year was the first year that we actually put one that was branded out under the SpeeDx name. So we had a field service engineer in Australia now who's involved in installation and maintenance of those. And I think we see that as a really big growth opportunity for the company. So I think, again, it's one of those situations where we're sort of expanding in multiple directions. I think, one of the challenges we do face, which I think is that with any sort of growth spurt like this, it's making sure that we maximize the potential of the people when they come in, right? It's one thing to hire them all in, it's another thing to get them trained and up to speed and do everything else. One thing that we are though committed to is expanding outside of Australia. So we're in the final stages now of developing a laboratory operation in the United States, in Austin, Texas. So we will be adding people in the US. That again will be mostly a laboratory-driven focus, at least to start with. It won't be in sales, for example, but it will be in lab. And then in Europe, we're expanding sort of business development and sales-related activities. So there's a lot of things going on. We also did add finally an HR person, so I mentioned that. I don't know what her plans are, but I suspect that she will be in need of support staff, because it's a little hard to do HR from start to finish for a company that's growing as fast as ours. But she's made a huge difference to the way that we actually bring people on, and how we recruit, obviously, and how we assess, what we need and how we go about identifying people. But I would say, in short, most of the positions that we've been able to successfully fill have been sort of more junior levels in the company. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is because that's where our biggest need has been in terms of increasing sort of throughput, horsepower. I think, and the other is that really we do like to see ourselves as a company that gives people opportunities to grow within the business. And so what we don't want to do really is sort of stack the sort of middle level of people with imports. And that, you know, then creates a barrier to people to grow, because I think you know, we want people to come in, commit to the mission, and see that as the mission succeeds, so their personal growth and their professional career will succeed along with it.
I love that vision to grow people with the company. I think it's a really incredible one. I know in my own personal journey, before I joined Cicada, I had 13 years at Google, and it was in that growth spurt of the company on the engineering team in Sydney. And, you know, you learn so much, not just technically, but you actually learn so much as a leader and a collaborator and as a collegiate employee and colleague of other people. Let's talk about, I'm just going to pivot slightly just to ask you a straight up question, because technical skills is a given. And I love the fact that you're nurturing talent. In terms of the growth stage of the company, like, what do you think are some of the good soft skills, which I actually hate that word, by the way, because I don't think the soft skills are soft. I think they're actually the really hard skills, like communication and teamwork and collaboration. You know, are there particular things that you find that are characteristic traits that you're looking for over and above, you know, the technical skills and that ability? Is it coachability? I feel like these were things I was hearing, but I'd love to.
You're answering your own question here. You really need me to answer? You've sort of covered it all. So, you know, I think, yes, so technical skill is one thing. So it's not the be all and everything, but if we're going to hire you to work in a lab, then it's sort of a given that you can work to a recipe and you can do the technical part of it. But I think, again, one of the things that in the transitional phase that we're in is we need people that can work collaboratively together. That's very important, because, you know, as you get bigger, you form, obviously, that the teams of people get larger. And so it's not just one or two people communicating with, it's much larger group of people. And so, you know, you need the ability to communicate effectively. You need a commitment to work within a team framework. And I think this senior management here is all committed to creating the environment where those teams work both together and then have the appropriate voice upwards through the company. But, you know, again, we really want people who are doers, who are, you know, who have a dynamic, they want to actually do, for want of a better term, and they're sort of dynamic and driven and you know, again, where we don't necessarily have to spell out to people what they'll get a base job description. But, you know, what we're not looking for is people who literally look down the PD and go, well, that's not my job, and that's not my job, so why are you asking me to do this? And one of the amazing things that is still true of the company is when some ridiculous demand comes in, people just step up. It shouldn't be a given, but it really, and we should never take it for granted, but it almost is, that people will step up. They will work Saturday, Sunday, you know, till midnight, whatever it takes to succeed. And I think we do tend to look for people who have that kind of, those are their traits, you know, essentially that they will buy into the idea, which we believe is very true, that everybody pitches in, everybody has their part to play, and there will be these periods of time when it really is over and above what you would necessarily expect somebody to do. But you are recognized for that, and there is reward for that. And ultimately, you know, we all succeed as the company succeeds. So I think, yeah, there's definitely those things. And I think, again, it's a different mentality a little bit from probably when it's a company of 4, 5, 10 people, where you're probably looking, you know, you're much individualistic sort of attitude is probably more welcome than it might be when you've got, you know, a bigger group. So yeah, working within the teams, flexibility with the fact that we are going to evolve the framework of how the company works. And this is kind of the thing that we're in now, where like all startups, we're very, very tech heavy company to start with, right? And we still got a lot of that, but now the move into more on the commercial development side, which is a different skill set and a different thing. So I think you know, it's incumbent on us to look at the people that come in and try to fit them where we think they will work within the company, as well as where they would be the most successful. And I think so far we've been reasonably good about attracting the right people and making those decisions.
I think it's a really great answer, and it's a good one to highlight. I often think about startups and scale-ups as being a team sport. And, you know, I saw SpeeDx, this was illustrative the other day, actually, just before. I know you've got Strategy Week happening at the moment, and, you know, one of your co-founders and I happened to be the first ones on site, and we were opening up the room and getting it ready and moving the chairs and the tables. And, you know, everybody that walked in the door from SpeeDx just dived in and started helping out. And it's that real team sport thing of, well, we just get it done. It's not
right. Well,
no
I do actually have an anecdote which is gone down and probably will go down in SpeeDx legend. So I had been working for the company for about 2 weeks. So I was hired in as a, you know, vice president of whatever, it doesn't really matter, right? And I'd worked for a company where vice presidents did vice presidential stuff in a large public company. And so one of my first things was to go to a large conference in Europe where we have all of our major customers coming to it, and a lot of our industry partners, including a lot of people that I know personally and have worked with in the past. And we were having a little symposium offsite. And so what we needed is to have people stand with a little sign directing the attendees to our symposium. And so this, I think, was still part of a sort of an interview, sort of a post-hire sort of interview thing. So I don't even know that they asked me. They just said, you know, you'll be out here with the sign. So I'm standing there outside this big meeting hall with a little sign that says SpeeDx this way. And what was funny is I thought, okay, nobody that knows me is going to come past. But sure enough, some people that I'd worked with in the past come past, and they look at me and they go, I thought you told me you were vice president of something. What are you standing out here with a sign? But I think, again, that's kind of that's kind of the acid test, right? It's nobody's too big, nobody's too important, nobody's to get involved in whatever we need to have done. You just get in there and get it done, whether it's labeling tubes or it's holding signs or whatever. And I think it, you know, I think a lot of us would be very, very uncomfortable or resistant to the point when that suddenly doesn't become a thing anymore with the company, right? So I think again, yes, the idea that we would bring somebody in who would automatically assume, you know, well, I have to have a PA and an entourage and 3 or 4 people doing this. I mean, obviously we would never consider hiring anybody like that, but you know what I mean? It's that that can-do attitude that we look for in everybody that works for the company. And I think it's, again, from my perspective, it's very important that from the top down, you show that, right? Because that's the message that you want people to get. They feel we're all in this together. We're all doing the same. We're all pulling in the same direction. I think that's very, very important. It's something we work. Actually, I wouldn't even say we work very hard at it. It's just a given in general, which is really, really nice. You know, it's again, for me, coming from a company where you had to have team building exercises, you had to have diversity class, you had to have all these things to sort of force that as an approach for your staff. And it just isn't that way here. It's a given from the founders through the people they hire, the people that we have in senior leadership, the board of directors, all the way down, which is what, you know, in my opinion, makes it really a very special company to work for.
I love it. I mean, you've inspired me. I'm just a hot announcement. No, I'm not quitting my job.
I don't think we've got a position for you right now. But if you want to send your resume in, we can file it, and who knows, maybe.
I love it. Thank you. Look, we've got a couple more questions that I'm conscious of time. We've got a couple of questions in here that are less to do about team and hiring, but more to do about SpeeDx that I'd love to ask that have come in through on the Q&A, because I think they're really good questions. So how long does it take for a test kit to be developed, and are there any regulations around that? Well, we know there's lots of regulations around that and they differ country by country. So I'll give the flash answer on that. But roughly how long are you finding it's taking? Can you divulge that? Sort of what does it take from idea to bringing something to market for SpeeDx now?
Yeah, so that's, that I could probably talk all afternoon. Unfortunately, it's hard to condense that into a simple answer. So I think there are some things that are very difficult to quantify in terms of time. So that would be when we're doing sort of exploratory or foundational research, and where we're actually creating essentially the prototype for a product, because just like in any other industry, that can fail multiple times before you end up with something that meets the requirements that you need to then commercialize as a product. I think the part that's easy is essentially, or not easy in terms of work, but easy in terms of time frame, is from that to the point where you have something that's manufacturable, and that we can probably do typically in about 6 months. Then we reach a point where we have to go outside of the company, because that's when we have to go to external clinical studies and the additional things that are required to even submit to the regulators for approval. And that is that's the part of the business that I'm most intimately involved in. And our challenge there is always what's going on in the external world. So this year, again, that's been very, very challenging, because everybody that we would work with is all coronavirus. Very difficult to get anything out, any other traction in there. But normally we would have a fairly regimented process, depending on which regulator we were going to. It used to be that to get what we call CE mark, which applies to multiple industries, right? So CE mark was the easiest. Then the next, it was the TGA, which is Therapeutic Goods of Australia. So that's to sell in Australia and New Zealand. And the hardest always is the FDA in the US. So, and that's now changed a little bit because the CE regs are getting more stringent. So, it would be a finite period of some additional months to do those studies, write them all up and then submit. And then you're essentially at the mercy of the regulator. So we in the past have had a very good relationship between our Director of Regulatory Affairs and the TGA, which has been hugely beneficial, because once a level of trust exists between the regulator and the company, then they're much likely to accept what you present to them without asking a million questions or sending it back 3 or 4 times. We're still in the process of doing that. Like, for example, in the United States, we don't have that level yet. But you're essentially at their mercy at that point. So yeah, it's as I said in the intro, it's one of the most challenging things about the industry that we work in, is that it's extremely highly regulated, and that makes it different from startups in, well, even Google or somebody developing apps for the web. Your only concern is, does it work and will the customers buy it? Not, does it have to go to a government regulator, or do I have to sign up 15 people to collect clinical samples across the world before I could even sell it to anybody? So that makes, I personally think this story even more remarkable, that the fact that we do now have global sales from a base here in this building in Sydney, because Australia, probably don't need to tell you, is not exactly the center of the IVD diagnostic world. And one of the things that we want to be is a global company selling all over the world, either directly or through partnerships with big companies. So yeah, I would say, depending on the complexity of the product, long answer short, or short answer long, or whatever, is somewhere between 12 and 18 months, something like that.
Yeah. You just mentioned something there, which was a really great leader into our next question that Kirsten has asked about, do you see an increasing demand for companies such as SpeeDx that provide bespoke solutions in response to issues encountered by larger companies? And is there sufficient support in Australia? Could Australia become the superpower of this? Could SpeeDx for Australia become the superpower of this?
So I think one of the, again, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. I'm just asking Madeline if she farmed these questions in. Or so the answer is, so one of the things that I think we are working on is for the Australian, so let's focus on the Australian market to start with. So one of the things here is that one of the vulnerabilities in the Australian market is the dependence on companies who are not based in Australia for supply chain. So big multinational companies like Roche and Abbott and whoever, who are not Australia based, for whom Australia is a relatively small part of their global sales, that presents a weakness for our customers, potentially because they cannot get access to product because it's now being sold, there's a demand that needs to be met in Europe or North America or wherever. And the coronavirus pandemic has really exposed that vulnerability. And so one of the things that we want to do is yes, exploit that in the domestic market and become a company that people look to for an entire solution in the area in which we work. So we would control the whole supply chain. And our first priority would be to provide that guarantee to our domestic Australian customers. I think as far as expanding beyond that, I think we will always seek to take advantage of being more nimble and for want of a better word, a niche-based company in terms of development and introduction. So I think we see it as we introduce products that are novel, that are sort of, in a sense, you've got these great big giants, right, grappling up here, Roche and Abbott and whatever, and they don't really pay that much attention to the people that are nibbling away at their ankles at the bottom until it reaches a point where all of a sudden they can't ignore them anymore. And then, hopefully we're in a position where we negotiate with them to put our products on their systems, which gains us access to thousands and thousands of placements around the world. Because that's really the key to us having major expansion in some of these markets is, we could never do that independently selling. We can do that in Australia for sure. We can do that in probably certain select European countries for sure. But, to do the United States or all of Western Europe or Japan or South America, it's, we need the partners. So what we do is, again, we become either a nuisance to them or something that we develop gets their attention, and then they're willing to approach us about how do we do it. I think one of the things that's always most rewarding as a small company is when big companies start putting out negative advertising or negative statements about something that you've got that they don't. That's wonderful. We all love that when, we'll put out a press release and they ask somebody, what do you think about this? And they're like, that's nothing, that won't work. That's not going to go anywhere. We're like, yeah, we've got them worried, because if they ignore us, then we're failing. But if they find us, we are a nuisance to them. We are creating something in a market that they control and they don't want to lose control over. Then either they have to compete with us or they come and they partner with us. And again, it's amazing that we have now successful partnerships with two of the biggest diagnostic manufacturers globally. In fact, I think they might even be if you counted Danaher as the whole. Anyway, they're in the top 5 global manufacturers, and we have formal partnerships with both of them. So yeah, we have big goals, we have big ambitions, but we also recognize that we need some help to get there.
I love that because it reminds me back to sort of one of the first stories that you told about, what's the impact on people and the why you get out of bed in the morning and how does this matter? And, when you talk about the patient at the coalface, they only see the doctor. But, you know, behind the doctor, there's the lab, and then there's these decisions, and then there's the tests, and then there's the companies that are providers. And so it's actually patient care essentially as a collaborative sport is really what I'm taking away from this. And, you know, this is that chance today to sort of peek under the hood a little bit and understand one of the soon to be really big players, but also through collaboration, becoming a really big player in the market out of Australia.
Right.
I'm really conscious of time. I've got one really good big question that's not written anywhere. So, you know, we'll have to slide this one in past the keepers, but I think this is going to be a pretty easy one for you.
The censor is sitting over here, so
yeah, I know.
She'll shut me up if I say something that I'm not supposed to.
2021, this is a two-part question. So one, what are you most excited about for SpeeDx in 2021? And what's the one thing that you would say to anybody out there who has joined us today or who watched this video, who really wants a career in this space? So two chunky questions, and you've got a few minutes to answer them.
Okay, so let's take, I'll probably forget the second one, so you might have to remind
I'll come back to that one, yeah.
But so the first one, I think, is for all of us here, is that this might sound a bit weird, but 2020 has been very much two sides of the same coin. So on the one hand, we've had a disastrous global pandemic that's claimed over 1 million lives and still is having devastating impacts across much of the globe. And that's obviously a very, very negative thing that's happened. On the other hand, the fact that we have had a massive infectious disease global pandemic has, I think, huge long-term positive ramifications for the industry that we work in, because it has enormously raised the visibility of the very thing that we work on, which is molecular-based tests for infectious diseases. And it's changed that whole dynamic. And I think for us, the exciting thing as a company is that we are being swept along in that tide of change. So I think a year ago, when we had, or whenever we had our strategy week for 2020, a lot of the things that we're talking about now were not really things that we were on our radar, not necessarily off the radar, but just we couldn't conceive of a way in which we could turn that into a commercially successful opportunity. And so what's happened for us is both in the fact that the coronavirus pandemic has driven sales, so that's driven revenue, so that's made us, you know, have the financial wherewithal now to look at these opportunities that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do in the past. And secondly, because it's changed the entire dynamic of the marketplace. And because we have people, very, very creative people here, we are able to exploit that. And that's a huge benefit to us, because again, we are not a big bloated multinational corporation that somewhat, you know, it's like turning an aircraft carrier when it's going in one direction. We have been able to very successfully pivot what we're doing. And I think 2021 will see us solidify that. So it will see us take things that we've developed a bit on the fly and actually formally put those into commercial production, marketing, sales, and that will influence that. It will absolutely influence the direction of the company for the next probably 5 years. So I think that's really what I think all of us are looking forward to, is how what's happened in 2020 frames the way we move in 2021. Obviously, we hope that the pandemic comes under control in other parts of the world. I have a personal vested interest in it doing so. Right now, it's very nice to be in a country where you can walk around, or at least in a part of a country you can walk around without masks, and people are not deathly afraid of acquiring the virus. What was the second question?
Second question, what's your piece of advice to somebody out there who's looking to, you know, join a SpeeDx or get involved in the journey or thinking about, you know, this space? Because I think you've got a wealth of wisdom and experience. You've worked in large companies. You're now in an emerging growth company. Your passion shines through. What's your one piece of advice to somebody starting out, maybe a graduate, soon to graduate, you know, that you'd say to them?
So I think, you know, we've talked about this a lot, but to somebody who's coming out with, you know, just a sort of generic science degree or whatever in biological sciences or chemistry or something, there's multiple ways you can go, but to me, no matter which path you take in the healthcare world, you will make an immediate impact on people's lives. And that if that's a driver for you, and I can't see how it isn't, because it's always been a massive one to me, then the immediacy of that makes whichever path you choose one that you can really be proud of at the end of the day, that you have actually contributed to the betterment of human health, which surely there's no more noble cause than that. As far as which area you choose to go in, I think it very much is down to individual personality. I think obviously for what we do, you know, it suits a certain sort of personality or mindset. It may not, it's probably not for everybody. You know, there's scope for people to do obviously much more direct patient contact stuff. So even in laboratory science, if you work in a hospital-based laboratory, you see the patients every day, you see the doctors every day. You know, it's a different experience to working in a diagnostic manufacturer. But I think in the end, it's all part of the same continuum. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage people to, again, like I've worked in all kinds of different sectors within the same arena. If you're really interested in, you want to get motivated to do infectious disease diagnosis or management, you read a book that I read when I was about 10, but it's not written for 10-year-olds necessarily. It's called The Microbe Hunters by Paul de Cruyff. It's been in publication consistently for about 120 years. It talks about all these pioneers in, you know, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch and all these guys that were founders of infectious disease diagnostics. It's a great read. And if that doesn't inspire you to want to be the next Walter Reed, I don't know what will. I'm not saying you could do that by working for SpeeDx, but it's a start. So yeah, all of those things really. I'm very passionate about getting smart, motivated people to work in the medical space and in laboratory medicine, no matter what size or scope or what they actually choose to do.
I love it. It absolutely shines through your passion and your enthusiasm for the entire sector, but specifically what you're doing now. And I just want to thank you so much for your time and for joining us today, Charles. And I know the team has popped in the link, and we'll be sure when we send out the video, a link to get in touch with SpeeDx and to pursue opportunities. They are growing. 2021, it's a growth year. I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. But, you know, we'd invite you to get involved, sign up to their newsletters, follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Twitter and elsewhere. There's a story a week, seems like, comes out of the company. And it's really amazing to see under the hood and to just, I think, take a moment for all of us here, particularly those joining us from around Australia, to recognise the capacity and capability that's being built out here in Sydney and the impact it's having on people all around the world. In diagnosis and you know, effective treatment and helping people with health and well-being. So thank you so much, Charles. And to everybody that's watching us and joined us today, thank you so much for your time. We would love you to stay connected and come along to the rest of the events that we're having over the next few weeks. Just check out our website and our hashtag Emerge2020. There's a whole range of Ask Me Anything sessions. It's a great opportunity, even if you're not looking to join a startup or to join one of the companies, it's a really good opportunity to get under the hood and understand a little bit more about what they're doing. And we don't often get to have these deep dives with people from the organization. So please sign up and get along. And I just want to give a special shout out and a thank you to the City of Sydney for their sponsorship. Without them, this wouldn't happen. And our event partner, South Everleigh. Thanks, everybody.